A nation's up in arms, but Emmanuel Macron still fancies his chances by turning passage of a very unpopular pension reform bill into a vote of no confidence. The French president convincing enough conservatives to avoid bringing down the government. But it was close in Parliament, 9 votes the margin. We'll ask about the lasting impact on the rest of Macron's term-limited 4 years in office. Could unions, for once united, still force a climb down over plans to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64, the next big day of strikes slated for Thursday, but already the angering, triggering wildcat walkouts and stoppages? After seeing his predecessors bend and backtrack, we'll ask about Macron's decision to double down on this reform and pick this fight. What lasting consequences for France, and dare we ask, for its democracy? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if it's victory at what cost for Emmanuel Macron. Joining us here in the studio, we're with Claire Lejeune, environmental activist, member of the NUPES, a left-wing coalition. Does one say NUPES or NUP? Which is the correct pronunciation? Whichever. Okay, there we go. Catherine Fieschi is the director of Counterpoint, the author of Populocracy, the Tyranny of Authenticity and the Rise of Populism. Welcome back.
Thank you. Welcome.
Sitting next to you, Damien Lecomte, political science researcher at Paris's Panthéon-Sorbonne University. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation, and you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. In the end, it was too close for comfort. Let's begin by crossing to the National Assembly. France 24's Clovis Casali is there. A 9-vote margin, and the way you were reporting it, some in the opposition viewing this as a measure of victory?
Absolutely. The opposition here is saying it was a miracle that the government saved itself today and was not toppled. One leading left-wing MP telling me, in the best-case scenario, we would have lost by 11 votes. And here it was by 9. And let me tell you, Francois, I've been to the National Assembly many, many times over the years, and I've never seen such activity. Such chaos in a way. Look at the number of cameras. You've got cameras from all around the world. You've got dozens and dozens of journalists. Quite difficult to walk around this room. And you've got MPs now coming to see journalists, giving their views of events, and everybody's got a different point of view. You've got on the one hand the opposition saying this isn't over. We will continue the fight. It will take place now on the streets with demonstrators showing that this pension reform bill should not go through, even though in a way they've lost today, because the government has survived this motion of no confidence. And then on the other hand, you've got the people who support Emmanuel Macron, notably from Renaissance, his movement, saying this pension reform bill is brave, the only thing to do, and in no way a dictator's move. Those were the words, of course, of the Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne. To sum up a bit the atmosphere here, I can tell you it's electric. A lot of animosity, and when the members of the NUP left-wing bloc came up to us and made some statements, I can tell you they're remaining defiant. They're saying, let's meet on the streets on Thursday. We will be hundreds of thousands of people across France. That's what they're saying, to protest, because the fight is not over, for them at least.
Clovis Casali reporting from the National Assembly. Many thanks. And we heard just before that vote the Prime Minister take to the stage. In his arsenal of tools, the President can do, I guess you could call it the reverse of a veto, Article 49.3, where you railroad through a bill and turn it into a vote of no confidence. Emmanuel Macron's measure passing, his weakened Prime Minister, Elisabeth Borne, saying these are the rules of the Constitution written in 1958 by General de Gaulle.
Article 49.3 was not the invention of a dictator, but the profoundly democratic choice of General Charles de Gaulle. because at the end there is a vote. We are coming to the end of the political and democratic path of this reform, and if you would like to overthrow the government bringing it, you now have that possibility. Thank you.
Claire Lejeune, it's legal.
It's legal, but not everything that is legal and possible in the Constitution are things that we would need to do and we want to do in a democracy. Clearly, they've been pushing this reform bill through in a very brutal way, and using the Article 49.3 was kind of on top of all of this process that was already very brutal for our democracy.
It's twice you've used the word brutal.
Yes.
Again, this is parliamentary procedure. And by the way, it's the 11th time since the new parliamentary session that they've triggered Article 49.3. What's brutal about that?
Well, that's already many times. 11 times is the largest number on such a small scale of time. And in a democracy, you have the legal aspect of it, and you have what's happening in the streets, you have what's happening in opinion, you've got how people are feeling about this, and all of these elements add up to a situation which is explosive. And the government, it was their responsibility, knowing that they had been elected to fight the far right, they should have heard that. And they didn't. They pushed through the 49.3. They spurred anger. We saw it on the streets this weekend, and that anger is not going to go home tonight. Far from that.
Now, the left is this call to go out in the street. The far right is saying we're taking it to the Constitutional Court. They want to go the quote-unquote legal route on this.
I think all the tools will be used. Charles de Courson also mentioned going to the Constitutional Court. So there'll be a mass demonstration on Thursday. Between now and Thursday, there may be spontaneous demonstrations and rallies. And there will also be this Constitutional Court tool that will be used, because some of the ways in which they used the Constitution and they pushed through some elements of this reform can be deemed unconstitutional.
All right, you mentioned Charles de Courson, just
Yes.
for our international viewers. When votes are close, canny politicians can get their 15 minutes of fame and perhaps more. De Courson, an obscure conservative MP until last week, who, according to Le Monde, is a direct descendant of a former member of the same body who back in 1793 voted for the beheading of King Louis XVI. Charles de Courson happens to head the tiny voting bloc that sponsored this vote of no confidence.
Ils sont tous élus du peuple.
They are all elected by the French people, whether they like it or not. They're free to vote as they please. As far as I'm concerned, I didn't strike any deal. If they approve of the motion of no confidence written by our group, I'll be pleased because I'm a Democrat, and that means respecting those who have different opinions.
C'est respecter ceux qui pensent pas comme vous.
So explain to us, Damien Lecomte, why is that the face of parliamentary revolt, especially now that we have this 9-vote margin that we saw in Parliament?
Well, clearly, I think that the result tonight show that, it suggests that if there had been a vote on the bill Thursday, the bill would have been rejected, because the rules of procedure are not the same for a no-confidence vote and a vote on a bill. When the members of the National Assembly vote on a bill, the results depend on a simple majority between the yes votes and the no votes. But for a no-confidence motion to be adopted, it requires the absolute majority of all members of the National Assembly. So it means that all the members who would have abstained on the bill, if there had been a vote on the bill, becomes basically are considered as supporter of the government on a no confidence vote. So the fact that it has been so close of being adopted, it really suggests that the government had no parliamentary majority in this National Assembly to adopt this bill.
And is it the likes of Charles de Courson who are convincing? What was it about the fact that he managed to sway so many to break ranks?
Well, I think that there are some conservative and centrist members of the Assembly who did not like all the abuse of procedure used by the government. The fact that he has used social security financing bill for this pension reform, which is really questionable, constitutionally speaking, because it allowed him to impose time limits of the deliberations on Parliament. And the fact that pause after pause, a vast majority of the population is against the bill, especially the working population. And all the unions are united, which is not often. In this political context, I think that some conservatives are not dislike the fact that the government may constrain as like that the parliamentary deliberation.
So we're watching live images there of the police moving forward. These are live images near the National Assembly, near the Invalides Armory. It's another night of wildcat protests in the French capital. We've seen them every night since last Thursday, and it's a question of people who don't like what they saw in the bill, and also you had, as we see the police charging these wildcat protesters there, to win over the dissident conservatives. Marine Le Pen's far right pledging to reward those who voted to topple the government.
We want to tell them, if you're an MP for Les Républicains and you vote for the motion of no confidence, no National Rally candidates will oppose you. To re-establish some form of balance in a game whose rules the government and the president plain and simply tried to rig. Courage deserves rewarding.
Is that like a friendly takeover or a hostile takeover of the conservative Les Républicains party that the National Front is trying? Sorry, the National Rally Party is trying?
I mean, I think what this is the proof of is that they are really learning to play politics. That's the really scary bit, is that, you know, they are learning procedure. They're learning what it is that they need to do in order to both advance their cause, but don't, you know, not appear to be the troublemakers. We're going to play by the rules, but, you know, we're going to make sure that we give you an easy ride. You know, this is very, very significant, because this has been their aim, the National Rally, from the moment that they were part of the National Assembly since last spring, is to prove that they are a party of government, that they can do it, that by the time the next presidential election comes along, that they can say, you know, over the past 5 years, we've learned how to do this. Trust us. We know what we're doing. So I think that was, you know, it was very effective from that point of view. Quite clear that their motion of no confidence, you know, was never going to pass. There is still...
Because just to remind for our viewers, there were two motions of no confidence. One by that small party headed by that small bloc headed by Charles de Courson. The other by the National Rally.
Exactly, and the Charles de Courson bloc has this, this kind of independence aura attached to it, which I think is what also spurred a number of the MPs to rally behind it. It didn't have a very heavy political connotation, and it enabled them to vote against the government whilst not having to rally to the rally, as it were, because no one wanted to collaborate.
I think we're seeing the live images there of the result of that second motion being read out by the Speaker of the French Parliament. Catherine Fieschi, I was listening there to Damien Lecomte and wondering if he says that the votes perhaps were not there last Thursday. Would it have politically been wiser for Emmanuel Macron to lose the vote on this pension reform and move on, or is it better for him to win the vote, and which he now has gotten his way by a narrow margin, and perhaps limp on politically for the foreseeable future?
Well, I mean, I think that it was probably foolhardy of Emmanuel Macron to table this reform now, to retable it. There was poor timing, there was terrible method. Not only did he limit the parliamentary debate, but there was no consultation with the trade unions. He placed his PM in a very, very difficult situation in that respect. So I think it was a catalog of mishaps and mismanagement and frankly vanity. And I think that that's one of the things that the French public, which hasn't been sold on Macron sort of from a personal point of view for a while. This is one of the things that they see now, that this is really hubris, that he's gone too far. And it's not so much that they think that the 49.3 article is undemocratic or unconstitutional. It is that at the end of this whole session, this whole catalog of events, actually using this and not going forward to the vote was really robbing Parliament of its voice, possibly an act of vanity. And also, I think for a number of even of his own party, a politically sort of subpar maneuver. Why not go to the vote? Why not let others carry the responsibility for the failure of the reform? And then, you limp on no matter what. I think that he is condemned to limping on at best. At this point, but he would have limped on, I think, with a measure of honor. This is perceived as vanity and dishonorable vanity at that.
All right, we got a measure of what Emmanuel Macron's thinking was last week. Daily newspaper Libération reporting how the president told leaders from his own party, quote, "Among all of you, I'm the only one who's not putting his post or his seat on the line, but I consider that in the current state of affairs, the financial and economic risks are too great. We can't play with the future of the country." And therefore, Damien Lecomte, he goes on. What do you follow that reasoning? Is that why he decided to press on with this reform?
I think that President Emmanuel Macron has really committed all his political identity to this reform, and it is part of what he wants to be remembered for. That is, he wants his legacy to be the one of a reformer, and he thinks that this reform is something that make him look a courageous reformer. And maybe even he doesn't completely dislike the idea of pushing it through no matter the cost, because it fits his idea of a strong leadership. But I think it is a dangerous risk for democracy, because we can really fear that all the resentment against this reform and the authoritarian moves that the government has used may benefit eventually to the national rally. So I think it fits his idea of a strong leadership, but the cost for democracy might be important.
Claire Lejeune, the French are a little schizophrenic sometimes. They grumble against their leaders, but they want a strong leader. In fact, in 2017, Emmanuel Macron employed the phrase of he wanted a Jupiterian presidency. And I think he was looking at his predecessor,
Yes.
François Hollande, who appeared weak.
I think Emmanuel Macron said that, but that doesn't mean that all French people think in that way. And if you look at the Yellow Vest movement and their revendications, they were for le RIC, le Réforme d'initiative citoyenne, which is a way of making power more horizontal, not more vertical. And the problem with Emmanuel Macron is that he fits very well the Fifth Republic institutions, which allows the president to govern in this very vertical and potentially very brutal way. And so he's using the whole of the powers that he has in his hands, and he's doing it against the will of the people, because this reform, there's between 70 and 80% of the population who are really against it, and he's pushing it forward. So I think in this case, the French people are in their vast majority very consistent and very clear about what they want and they don't want. And they're saying it. Not only are they saying it, but they're going into the streets to demonstrate. They're losing part of their salary by striking. And this is in a context where inflation is skyrocketing, where people are really struggling at the end of the month, and they're putting their livelihoods on the line to defend their opinion on this. So in this case, no, the French people are very clear about what their opinion is. And this has become about Macron's legacy and about Macron's way of governing. Now it has become something so much bigger than this pension plan problem.
So much bigger. I want to pick up on that. But first, again, we have confirmation. The second vote of no confidence failing. We saw those images of the wildcat protests and the riot police charging. Let's cross over to France 24's Emmanuel Macron with the latest near the National Assembly. Emerald, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so we're still in Place Vauban, and police have surrounded the square. So I'd say that's about 200 or so protesters still here. Some have begun to leave, but those who are here are still, very much very angry, and they want to show that their anger. There wasn't perhaps much surprise that the motion failed, but a lot of disappointment. And we saw a couple of bins being set on fire, and generally people just wanting to stay put and show their anger.
Showing their anger. What are the slogans you're hearing?
A lot of Macron, you don't want us to be here, but we are still here. We're not going anywhere. A lot of that, and there was mostly a young crowd today. A lot of students. And also teachers. I would say that was the vast majority of people represented at this protest.
Emmanuel Maxwell reporting live there as police contain that group. Last Thursday alone, after the government pulled the vote in Parliament, police detained 258 protesters, triple the number for the entire previous month. Most released in the following hours. But wildcat protests and strikes, a chance for law enforcement to show muscle with orders from the préfecture to intervene with reactivity and firmness. That's a quote from the directive given by the prefect of police. Here you see images from Sunday evening in Paris's right bank in the Rue Montorgueil in the center of the capital, where police basically encircled the protesters. Damien Lecoultre, let's talk a little bit about, because it's always impressive for an international audience to see the French demonstrations, lots of tear gas, riot police. We hadn't seen so much of it when they were union-sponsored, approved marches. Unions have their own crowd control unit. The fact that it is getting more violent since last Thursday, is that something that helps or hurts the president?
Well, I think that in the context that we have described, the use of the 49.3 is clearly seen as a provocation and as an authoritarian move. So clearly it can trigger a rise in the surge in the social movement, and we can possibly see that despite the unions, that may lead to more violence, because you have people that may be going to say, we have played by the rules, we have protested peacefully, and not only they did not listen to us, but they did everything they could do to go as fast as possible and to push it through, despite the absence of the majority in parliament. So maybe we can see a rise of violence in the social movement. That is a possibility.
And if there's a rise in violence, because we saw with the Yellow Vest movement, the more it got violent, the more the president's popularity rebounded. If it becomes more violent, does that play into the president's hand?
That is possibly, maybe the president bet on it, but I think it is a risky gamble for him, because when you have the vast majority of the population who is against the bill, they may sympathize with the social movement, even if it becomes more radicalized.
Meanwhile, we've seen those wildcat protests, but we've also seen more demonstrations, like Monday in Bordeaux, as refineries go back on strike in Brittany. The garbage piles up here in Paris, and air traffic controllers calculate how many domestic flights they're going to be canceling in the next few days in the build-up to Thursday. The next round will definitely be in the streets and counting the number of people who walk off the job on that day. Andrew Hillier has more.
clashes on the streets of the French capital as protesters keep up pressure on the government after it forced pension reform through Parliament. On Sunday, this was the scene in the Paris suburb of Rosny-sous-Bois. Dozens of protesters from the CGT Labour Union took over a local shopping centre. Across the country, demonstrators rallied to show their opposition to the plans to raise France's retirement age from 62 to 64. And there are yet more protests and strikes set to take place later this week. Rubbish collectors say they'll continue a walkout that's left some 10,000 tonnes of garbage piled up on the streets of Paris.
The situation is catastrophic for the residents, for the whole of Paris, as well as for the tourists. Rats during the day, endless rubbish bins. Dirty city, very dirty.
The CGT Labour Union has warned that 2 more oil refineries could shut down Monday, and the union's leader says its members don't plan on backing down anytime soon.
Every day there are new ideas. That's what the unions have asked for. We're here to raise the alarm, to say there's a lot of anger.
Unions have already called for a fresh day of protest this Thursday, with strikes and rallies expected across the country.
Claire, we've had unity among trade unions between the moderate reformist ones and the more radical ones. And that unity has lasted since the month of January. What's the best strategy going forward for those unions?
Yes, and indeed this unity is quite precious because it wasn't there at the last pension reform plan that was 2 years back now. So yes, so this unity has held strong, it's still holding, and together they are warning Emmanuel Macron on what could happen in the weeks to come, because up to now the demonstrations were organised by them. So they're calling for a demonstration on Thursday. So they're also in a state of mind where it's not over at all.
Is it better to have piecemeal strike days one by one, or we've heard the call sometimes in these demos for a general strike, indefinite rolling general strike?
Well, what they've got to take into account is the fact that people are struggling with inflation. Their pay rolls are not enough sometimes to finish the end of the month. So they have to be careful also on the rhythm of the strike so that people can carry on participating in the strikes and demonstrations. So what we've seen also is an alternation between strikes on Thursdays or Tuesdays with demonstrations, and also there's been rallies on Saturdays, at weekends. But what we've seen since Thursday is just non-end series of rallies, because people need to express their anger, and they're just demonstrating in a way that is random because they haven't been allowed to organize. That's the thing also. What we've seen is a rise in police brutality, and also a rise in a way of disorganizing collective action, because they were gathering in Concorde, and that was banned. So they were groups were forming to kind of find ways of demonstrating, and that was banned by the police force. So that's what's created this impression of chaos.
So do the unions have a problem? Will they be overwhelmed?
Well, there will be this demonstration on Thursday, which will be hopefully massive, and that will create the momentum for this reform to stop. But that's exactly what they're saying, is we have no way of knowing now. They've pushed so far, and the anger is so high that we have no way of knowing what's going to happen in days to come. And they will not be able to be held responsible for what is going to happen in days to come. What they're saying is that they have warned Emmanuel Macron, they wrote to him in a united way, and Emmanuel Macron did not answer this letter. He was abroad for most of the time of the debate on this reform. He has not taken any clear position on what was going to happen in days to come. So what is on the agenda now in the weeks to come is for a big part unknown.
And we haven't heard from the French president. We expect to hear from him in the coming days. Catherine Fieschi, there have been some comparisons made between what we're witnessing here in France and the strikes for higher pay that we've seen across the Channel in the UK. There too, unions have had to measure how much they dial it up for how long, and the jury's still out as to what's the most successful strategy. Are unions making a comeback? They had lost a lot of their clout in recent years.
Well, I mean, I think that they certainly are in the UK, and in France they're in a particular situation, which is that, you know, they are post-Gilets jaunes, and one of the things that the French unions need to prove is that they can achieve as much as the Gilets jaunes,
the yellow vests,
were able to achieve. You know, the yellow vest in some ways was regarded as the death knell of the French unions, because in just a couple of months, the yellow vests were able to obtain what the trade unions hadn't been able to secure for their members, for over years.
The withdrawal of that carbon tax, which was what sparked it all.
The withdrawal of that carbon tax, the reevaluation of minimum wage, a whole host of reforms, plus a kind of a more open debate. I mean, they, in essence, what it looked like was that if you did the wildcat protests and if you did resort to violence, you probably had a better chance of getting heard than if you went via the trade unions. So for the trade unions right now, it's a very important moment in France. There's also all sorts of internal issues to each trade union movement, but it's a very important moment for them. But I think that what's interesting here is that the way that the government has behaved on this whole pension reform, they have is in a sense making their worst nightmare come back. They were traumatized by the Gilets jaunes. You can see that the way that they're handling the protests at the moment, trying to protect the Champs-Élysées, trying to protect the Arc de Triomphe and so on, it's because they really do not want a replay of those images, that really shocked the French and shocked the world.
Yeah, all those metro stations are closed in the touristy parts of Paris.
Exactly, and nobody wants a replay of that. But in a sense, they've done everything they could, in a sense, by marginalizing the unions, by taking the PM's, in a sense, prerogative to deal with them away. They have created a situation where, we're on the verge of a Gilets jaunes redux, more than if they'd handled it differently. And I would just close on one thing, which is that, we're talking about dangers to democracy. I don't know about dangers to democracy, but I do know that one of the things that we see is this is the proof of the steady erosion of the legitimacy of this particular moment in France, the Fifth Republic.
So when you hear Claire Lejeune arguing in favor of citizens' referendums, is that how you would translate it? The RIC, the...
Yes, well, right now, we've got to find a way out of this, and in a sense, it must be another government or a dissolution of a national assembly so that a new assembly can be elected, or there's also a referendum that could be called on this pension plan, and this is quite. It's quite amusing because a member of government.
We just have breaking news. The referendum. Of shared initiative, I guess you translated it as, but it is a call.
Initiative.
A citizens' initiative referendum has been submitted by the left to the Constitutional Council in the last minutes. So that's happening. When you see that happening, when you see does that further again undermine the institutions of the Republic, where you're supposed to be the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary of a traditional three-way split? If we're always, if these referendums happen, does that just add another layer?
Well, I think it goes back to something that Claire said, earlier on, which had to do with the fact that Macron is kind of using to the hilt the powers of a president of the Fifth Republic. And he's doing that, but actually what he's got facing himself is an assembly that looks much more like the Fourth Republican Assembly. He's got no majority. He's trying to create an optical illusion of finding an ad hoc majority on this issue, an ad hoc majority on that issue. That's failing. So in essence, he's trying to play the Fifth Republican president in a situation that just no longer fits. It's too fragmented, which is why I think that we're not seeing, the undermining of French democracy, but we are seeing the erosion of this particular model of the republic.
Was it always doomed to fail, Damien Lecomte? We remember the speech Emmanuel Macron gave on the night of the second round of legislative elections last June, where he said he would work piecemeal on different legislation, that he would reach out and compromise, that he had what he called a relative majority in Parliament, almost making it sound like it would be Germany, where we have compromises and everything is written down in a platform. But instead, it's been otherwise. Play sociologist for us and tell us, is that impossible in France? Did you believe it when he said it?
I don't believe it is totally impossible because political culture can evolve. France has known the precarious majority and precarious coalition since 1962. We know now this rule of a strong majority most of the time in the National Assembly, but since last June, we have entered a new phase of the Fifth Republic. Clearly, we'll see how long it will last. But since last June, the government has been compelled to negotiate further to adopt most of its bills. And the fact is that most of its bills have been adopted by the National Assembly, most of the time with the support of the Republicans, and that is why
the Conservatives,
with the Conservative Party, and that is why Emmanuel Macron attempted to suggested that he would like a coalition with the Republicans, or at least a confidence and supply agreement, perhaps. But until then, the Republicans had never resolved to enter this kind of negotiation with him. Because the Conservative Party, the Republicans, are in a complicated situation between Emmanuel Macron's party and the National Rally. There is not so much space, political space between the two, and so they are torn between these two political forces, and they have real difficulties to define a political line and to unite behind this line. So this is really the point, and that is why this no confidence motion tonight was important, because for the first time some conservatives and centrists were ready to vote this no confidence motion.
So what happens now?
Well, I think now, whatever happens to the pension reform bill, it will be very difficult for Elizabeth Borne or any other prime minister to govern, because they cannot use the 49.3 for every bill, and now it will be very difficult, I think, in Parliament to find the way back to deliberation. Probably the next month at least will be difficult. I think that even if the pension reform bill is signed into law, it will be a Pyrrhic victory.
The Prime Minister, a Pyrrhic victory. The Prime Minister, Elisabeth Borne, telling the French news agency AFP that she is determined to continue to carry the needed transformations. AFP also reporting that she is now at the French presidential palace after those votes of no confidence fell short at the National Assembly. Claire Lejeune, lots of questions. Let's begin with Elisabeth Borne. Your thoughts on what her role has been and what the role of the Prime Minister is in this republic.
Yes, well, the reality here is that this president has no popular support, especially not now. Already the presidential election showed that he had no majority in the country, and he had no clear majority in the Assemblée Nationale now. And all this sequence on the pension plan reform has showed also that people are ready to demonstrate against the way he governs and against the project he is trying to push. So this decision of Elisabeth Borne to stay in place, to not change, so they're not changing the government apparently, they're just pushing forward, is a clear indication that they have not heard or understood a thing that is happening in this country today. And this
could be a statement to buy time.
Yes, it could, but in the meantime, the anger is going to demonstrate itself in days to come, and I think there's something that has been broken, and it's going to be so hard to repair. And this is also what explains that people like Charles de Courson, who has not at all the same political line as the NUPES, economically or on many subjects, they are opposed. But what he understood, and what we all understood when we promoted this non-confidence vote, is that there's something very deep happening here. Our institutions, our democratic institutions, are being harmed. And this is a way of endangering whichever projects could come to power tomorrow. So this is a very dangerous path they're treading on. And we will see in days to come.
You heard that clip of the Prime Minister at the outset of the show, what she was saying to the MPs and brandishing the specter of the previous regime that France had after World War II, where they had 25 governments in the space of 12 years, and there was a lot of political instability.
Yes, but the world has changed a lot. France has changed a lot. And today, you can't govern in such a vertical way and in such a confident way when you have so little popular support and so little support in Parliament. It just doesn't work, and we're seeing it. It's not going to work. With the 4 years to come, it's going to become ungovernable, and whichever reforms they try to push through, there's going to be demonstrations, there's going to be resistance, there's going to be anger, and all this is going to go in no good direction for anyone.
Emmanuel Macron, who's a pillar of the European project as the leader of France, Catherine Fieschi, the next few days, the French president is scheduled to go to Brussels. He's scheduled to host King Charles' first foreign visit by the new monarch in the UK. It's a very important visit symbolically. He's preparing to go to China soon. How does he address this issue of what's happening domestically?
Well, I think it's probably Emmanuel Macron's, greatest failing, but also his greatest strength, that he is unfazed by this sort of thing. This is partly why, so many people in France just, don't understand how he can be so disconnected as to, this doesn't shake his faith in his capacity to either shape the future of the country or to shape the future of Europe. I also think that...
And what street credibility does he have on the European stage after this? Or do they just look at it and think, oh, this is just the French playing the stereotypes, all of this?
Well, there is a measure of that. The French will be French, and they always reject these reforms. And I think there's a lot of cliche playing out. But I also think that let's face it, if we think of the European stage, Scholz is not in a terribly good position. He's not going to nobody wants to deal with Meloni, who's at that essentially a post-fascist party. So I think that for better or for worse, Macron is still somebody who comes along with ideas, with a true commitment to Europe, with the capacity to speak on the international stage. But what he's going to do is he's going to flee to that international stage in the way that he's done before, when in fact, part of what he needs to do is to actually spend time, reconnecting, coming to terms with the fact that he doesn't have the majority that he used to have, and that things are going to get harder for him. On this, I completely agree. It's going to be a really difficult road ahead. We're less than a year into his second mandate.
But he's still got a lot of road ahead of him. Damien Lecomte, we remember it when the Yellow Vest movement began, Macron's popularity plummeted. But he seemed to sort of thrive on the adversity, and he kind of rebounded.
Yeah, he rebounded, but as you said, he rebounded also because he conceded. He made some concessions to the Yellow Vest, even with the procedure with the Grand Débat. So, if he keeps this kind of authoritarian way to govern, I'm not sure it will help him to regain popularity.
Not sure it'll help him to regain popularity. We shall see. The next test is Thursday. When the next National Strike Day. Claire Lejeune, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank as well Catherine Fieschi, Damien Lecomte. Thank you for joining us here for the France 24 debate.